as we did in Beijing, to prevent rollback and reassert gender equality, to recommit to the vision on which Beijing was born? We can't change the past, but we can and we will change the future. I call on all of you here today to use your power and influence to ensure that the future we committed to 25 years ago for every woman and girl everywhere becomes her lived reality.
I thank the Chair of the Working Group of the Human Rights Council on the issue of discrimination against women in law and in practice for her statement. I now invite Ms. Dubravka Simonovic, Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, its causes and consequences, to make a statement.
President of General Assembly, United Nations Secretary General, Your Excellencies, I am honored to be here today as United Nations Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, its causes and consequences. I would like to remember that 26 years ago, I was in this building participating in negotiations of a Beijing Platform for Action. Then I attended the Fourth World Women's Conference as delegate of Croatia, and later on, in different capacities, I have followed up all +5 follow-up processes. As chairperson of Commission on the Status of Women, as member of CEDAW committee, and since 2015, in my current capacity as Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, the human rights mandate entrusted to recommend measures, ways and means at the national, regional, and international levels on eliminating violence against women. This year, 2020, was expected to be a big year for women, for reviewing and pushing forward the women's agendas. However, due to the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic, everything has been scaled down, and we are meeting in this half-empty room, very much missing the presence of women's activists whose participation is crucial to push this agenda forward, but we still need to push it forward jointly. COVID pandemic is also negatively affecting my mandate's work, with current visits on hold. But during past 5 years, I have conducted 11 country visits and elaborated 10 thematic reports. All of them are revealing huge gap between realities of women and girls at the ground and international standards. In addressing COVID pandemic on 27th March, I have called states to focus on domestic violence at home, and I have also called for information to be sent to my mandate. I have received 274 inputs, and now I have prepared a report on intersection between COVID pandemic and pandemic of gender-based violence against women. We also need to focus on pushback movements mentioned by United Nations Secretary General. We have seen that such movements have stopped ratification of Istanbul Convention in some countries. They have stopped changes of discriminatory parts of constitution in some others, and also discriminatory laws. So I would like to recall the call of Secretary General that he made, that we need to push back movements by implementation of those standards that we have accepted through implementation strategies. Gender-based violence against women is structural pandemic of ongoing violations of women's human rights. It is widespread. It affects 1 of every 3 women worldwide. Out of 10 intimate partner femicide, homicide killings, more than 80% of victims are women. Yet it is most invisible, it is underreported, and it is normalized, and not adequately addressed by states in line with their international commitments. So today we need to uphold Beijing Platform for Action as universal and comprehensive global framework, but they should be implemented in conjunction with other complementary instruments like CEDAW and regional treaties and SDG platform, using synergies between them, which would then lead to accelerated elimination of violence against women and girls. We also need to focus on areas that are not previously in the spotlight and new forms of violence like online violence against women, obstetric violence against women in politics, and so on. For example, I'm preparing next thematic report on rape that will be followed with model law on rape with aim to support and encourage process of harmonization of national laws with international standards. Today, due to the time constraints, I am not able to repeat all recommendations made by my mandate related to implementation focus, implementation strategies. I would like to flag a few of them. It is important to elaborate global implementation plan on violence against women as a way to accelerate implementation and harmonization of national laws with international standards. I would also like to propose inclusion of violence against women as a standing agenda item of the Commission on the Status of Women and orientation of the CSW towards implementation strategies. Establishment of UN system-wide and coordinated approach to combat violence against women would be also important step. Guide on implementation of CEDAW General Recommendation 35 on gender-based violence against women, and optional protocol on violence against women to CEDAW. Under implementation strategies, I would like to flag integration of EDAW platform into the UN system and establishment of a femicide watch at the national, regional, and United Nations level. After inspiring statements that we have heard today, I hope that some of those recommendations will find their way in the outcome document of this session. Thank you.
I thank the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, its causes and consequences for her statement. I now invite the Assembly to view the pre-recorded statement by the eminent high-level champion of gender equality, Ms. Nomzamo Bata.
Thank you, Secretary General and President of the General Assembly. Good morning to all dignitaries present. I'm proud to be speaking today as a champion of gender equality and a goodwill ambassador for UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency. 25 years ago, in Beijing, China, the world made a promise: equal rights and opportunities for women and girls everywhere. 25 years later, the Beijing Platform for Action remains a cornerstone of the UN's work to uphold the rights of women and girls, including women and girls who have been forced to flee their homes because of violence, conflict, or persecution. Member states reiterated their commitment when they affirmed the Global Compact on Refugees, which calls on all stakeholders to empower women and girls in refugee camps as well as host communities. But the world still has a far long way to go to achieve gender equality. And to quote the UN Secretary General, it is the biggest human rights challenge in the world. At the end of 2019, an unprecedented 79.5 million people had been forced to flee their homes because of conflict, persecution, and violence. More than half of them are women and girls, many at risk of discrimination, violence, child marriage, and lack of access to quality education. With my engagement with the UNHCR, I have had the opportunity to meet with forcibly displaced women and girls in refugee camps and informal settlements. In all my interactions and meetings with these women and girls who have been forced to flee, I have been continuously inspired by their resilience, courage, and hope. I remember in my very first visit to a refugee camp in Dzaleka, Malawi, I met a young girl. She was 16 at the time, and I asked her what she wanted to be when she grew up. And she said, "I want to be a doctor." Because every single morning she would see her father put on that white coat and get ready to serve humanity. I was moved by her passion and, of course, her conviction. Growing up in her country, there was no doubt in her young mind that she too could be a doctor, just like her father. She felt empowered to dream. But when war broke out, they were forced to flee their home. And so she started questioning that very dream. How could she, a refugee girl living in a refugee camp in the smallest corner of the world, have that dream now? Access to education for refugees is critical. Currently, only 3% of refugees worldwide have access to higher education. Moreover, while COVID-19 related school closures have affected students globally, refugee girls suffer disproportionately. Based on the UNHCR data, the Malala Fund has estimated that as a result of COVID-19, half of all refugee girls in secondary schools will not return when classrooms reopen. 1 in 3 women have been subjected to gender-based violence worldwide, and this includes displaced women and girls. COVID-19 is exacerbating inequality for so many young girls, and of course, the LGBTQI community. Because of the social and economic impacts of the pandemic, many displaced women and girls are also at increased risk of being forced into survival sex and early child marriage by their families. But forcibly displaced women are agents of change, challenging the status quo, fighting for girls' rights, and of course using their voices to demand equality. Gender equality is fundamental to every aspect of UNHCR's work, working with and for refugee women and girls towards their equal participation in society and leadership in all decisions that affect their lives, particularly economic empowerment. Prioritizing the safety and security of refugees and displaced women and girls and all those at risk, and calling for an end to gender-based violence. We have a collective responsibility to accelerate global action to realize women's rights for an equal future, as there can be no equal future without the full and equal participation of all women and girls everywhere. And this is the generation to accomplish that. Thank you.
I thank Ms. Mabata for her statement. I now invite the Assembly to view the pre-recorded statement by the representative of civil society, Ms. Sasha Gabizon.
Thank you. Honorable Secretary General, delegates, feminists, I'm Sasha Gabizon, Director of Women Engaged for a Common Future, and it's a great pleasure to address the General Assembly to celebrate the 25th birthday of the Beijing Platform for Action. Beijing, where I went with the other 30,000 participants, has given us a historic commitment for gender equality, and it has galvanized global feminist solidarity. But now, 25 years later, in many countries, instead of progress, we see regress. Sexual and reproductive health rights are under attack. We see women human rights defenders, indigenous women, women of color, trans women imprisoned, assassinated, discriminated. We need you all to push back against this pushback. Therefore, the civil society feminists are supporting UN Women with the Generation Equality campaign and forums. With the combined crises of armed conflict, COVID-19 and the climate environmental crisis, we need to stand up even more for women's rights, because women, in all their diversities, are at the front lines fighting these multiple crises. Women are the majority of the health sector workers, and they are the majority of those who feed their families, while 800 million people are sliding into extreme poverty and hunger. Women are also the majority of those under attack from increased sexual and gender-based violence as a result of the COVID lockdowns. The causes of this gender-based violence and discrimination are systemic, grown out of colonialism, slavery, patriarchal traditions that perpetuate violence against peoples of color, Dalits, sex workers, people with disabilities, non-gender conforming persons, and are upheld by exploitative economic structures and racist laws and institutions. Thanks to the tireless efforts of many feminists, we have seen progress with the Me Too campaign and now with the new ILO Convention 190 on violence and harassment. We need all UN member states to ratify C190 now. And we won't let you off the hook on your past commitments. We demand the implementation of CEDAW, of the Istanbul Convention, of Agenda 2030, and it's goal number 5 on gender equality. We need to get back on track. We intersectional feminists are insisting on structural transformation. We need you to put your money where your mouth is. Already in Beijing, we called to defund the military and to instead invest in healthcare, social protection, women's rights. We call on you to end the sales of small arms, to adhere to the SG's call for global ceasefire. We need the women and men impacted by the conflicts in the Security Council, not the arms exporting nations. That is clearly a conflict of interest. Some G20 countries are putting billions of COVID funds into fossil fuels. The COVID funds should not worsen the climate crisis, nor armed conflicts. We want to build better. We want to build forward. We call on you to divest from plastics and pesticides and minerals and nuclear industries, and instead we need a just transition for workers from these sectors. We need to invest in a gender equitable and green transformation, and we need debt cancellation and an equal share of COVID vaccines for the countries from the global south. And we need a UN tax convention to end the downward spiral of tax paradises from which the 1% of billionaires profit whilst 3.7 billion people suffer poverty. If you want to reverse this deepening trend of inequalities, let's not wait until the UN turns 100. Feminists want system change now.
I thank Ms. Cabezon for her statement. I now invite the Assembly to view the pre-recorded statement by the young woman leader, Ms. Ishel Adolfo.
Sakariki Bonogel, Pan Iskeye. Buen día a cada uno de los presentes. Mi nombre es Ischel María José Lucas Adolfo. Tengo 21 años de edad. Soy una joven maya quiché y maya mam del departamento de Quetzaltenango, Guatemala. Actualmente soy voluntaria en la red departamental Las Niñas Lideran Quetzaltenango, Guatemala, un espacio para amplificar la voz de las niñas y adolescentes en el mundo, apoyada por Rise Up. Y también soy una líder de la coalición de acción sobre violencia de género. En Guatemala somos el 51.5% de mujeres. El 33.4% son de 0 a 14 años de edad. El 61% somos de 15 a 64 años de edad. El 47.7% somos de la cultura maya. El 78.3% somos alfabetas y el 21.7% son analfabetas, según el censo que se realizó en el 2018. A pesar de ser un porcentaje alto de la población, no se nos ha tomado en cuenta en cargos de toma de decisión, debido al machismo en el que aún vivimos y la desigualdad e inequidad de derechos. En relación a la pandemia del COVID-19, el 40% de casos confirmados son mujeres y también ha afectado el 27%, creando la mortalidad. También, debido a la pandemia, no solo nos ha afectado en la educación, sino también en la salud y en la mortalidad de mujeres. Asimismo, la seguridad ante cualquier violencia, desempleo y embarazos en adolescentes. De enero al 20 de mayo del 2020, 1.962 embarazos en adolescentes de 10 a 14 años fueron reportados y 44.901 en adolescentes de 15 a 19 años, según el Ministerio de Salud Pública y Asistencia Social. Debido a todos estos datos, hoy pido en nombre de las niñas, adolescentes y jóvenes a todos los líderes y lideresas, así como también a los tomadores de decisiones que me están viendo y escuchando el día de hoy, a crear entornos seguros desde nuestra niñez hasta nuestra vida adulta, en el que no tengamos miedo al que dirán, a la violencia, a la discriminación, exclusión, desaparición forzada o muerte. Brindarnos una educación integral desde los primeros años de vida en la escuela, en el que se nos empodere y eduque como futuras mujeres líderes de nuestra vida e independientes. Ofrecer servicios de salud integral, en el que no seamos estigmatizadas por exigir métodos anticonceptivos, planificación familiar y así prevenir las enfermedades de transmisión sexual. Aperturar empleos sin exigir años de experiencia, cuando apenas nos hemos graduado. Crear políticas públicas integrales y programas de formación, atendiendo a las leyes nacionales y convenios internacionales firmados por nuestros gobiernos. Para lograr todo esto, necesitamos trabajar en alianza, nosotras, las niñas, adolescentes y jóvenes, y ustedes como tomadores y tomadoras de decisiones. Dennos los espacios de diálogo y aperturen consultas con niñas, adolescentes y jóvenes, ya que quienes sabemos de nuestras necesidades somos nosotras, las niñas, adolescentes y jóvenes de todo el mundo. Gracias.
I thank Ms. Adolfo for her statement. We have heard the last speaker for the opening segment of the high-level meeting. As agreed by the Assembly in its Resolution 73-340 on the modalities and indicated on the program, this high-level meeting will proceed without a break and conclude at 7 p.m. The plenary segment will begin immediately following the opening segment and will be held until 6:50 p.m. The closing segment will take place immediately thereafter. Before we begin the plenary segment, I invite members to view a short video entitled 25 Years of Progress and Promises for Women's Rights.
The year was 1995.
I declare the NGO Forum on Women open!
Women's movements and NGOs asked for and governments adopted a visionary agenda for gender equality. The Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action called for systemic change to realize the rights of women and girls around the world. It was a promise by the nations of the world to end gender-based violence, secure girls' rights, ensure equal pay for work of equal value, increase women's participation in decision-making, and end women's poverty. 25 years later, as the UN turns 75, we have seen some progress. Our world has changed since Beijing, yet no country has fully achieved gender equality as we enter the decade of action to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. This is our wake-up call. It's time to end gender-based violence, to make the economy work for women, to accelerate women's participation in decision-making and peace-building, and to invest in feminist movements and leadership. It's time to renew our commitments and take decisive action to make gender equality a lived reality in this generation. The time is now, and we must act.